and I'm your moderator today, as you can see. I want to thank the Legion for the use of the hall and the coffee, and Mike McClellan is the financial officer back there that's in charge today. And then the donuts and the orange juice are donated by the Carroll County Corn Growers Association, and we got Janelle Kraft is district field manager for the Iowa Corn Growers District 4 in this area. So I want to thank both of those groups for sponsoring this today. We will have opening remarks and from each of the legislators, and then the committee has put some questions together. After a while, we'll open it up for questions from the floor. I would ask that when you are recognized, you would state your name, and if you're with some organization or represent some organization, okay, you can tell us that, or if you as an individual, that's fine also, and we'll go from there. So with that, I'm going to open up. I don't know if you guys have decided who goes first, or you as Senator.
I think beauty before beast.
Okay.
In Audubon, they said it was best in Segabar, B and S. So here we go. Well, I'm in the Senate, second term, 5th year. My committees are Human Resources, which I am the chair of. Human Resources stands for Health and Human Service Policy Committee is what that stands for. And it takes up most of my time every day. The other committees I'm on is Agriculture and Local Government and Veterans Affairs. So those are the 4 committees I serve on. But as I said, I spend the bulk of my time working on human service and DHS kind of issues. And as chairman, I get the ability to ask for study bills long after the date that anybody else could ask for a draft for a study bill. And currently, I think there's about 40 different bills that I've asked to be written since we started the session. So in order for a bill to become a law, you have to go through the process of a subcommittee and a full committee and then floor debate before it can be sent to the other house, where it has to go through all those 3 steps. The big problem for us in the Senate is with 17 different standing committees and only about an 8-hour period during the day to have a 1-hour block for a subcommittee. Think of the rooms that you need. Now, in the Senate, there's really only 5 small rooms because subcommittee meetings can be 2 people or 200 people. There's usually a 3-member subcommittee, but you never know how many people are going to show up for that issue. And so scheduling a room that will hold that number is difficult. And the fact that they really didn't build subcommittee rooms when they were building the Capitol back 100 years ago. There's just, because one of the situations is we use the lobby behind the Senate, which has 2 big tables and chairs all around. That's where you can have 2 subcommittees at one time. And that one gets used the most. And then there's a room they call the smoking room. It's called that because you used to be able to go smoke there. You can't smoke there anymore. And it's a room about a 1/4 the size of this one. And those are the 3 rooms, and occasionally you can get a bigger room. If you think you're going to have 200 people, of course you can't put that in a small room, so you have to plan. So it's the clerk's nightmare then to figure out the schedules of the 3 members that have to be there and find a room to put them in. So right now we're 2 weeks from funnel week, so those 40 bills that I may have available are going to have to get through that process in the Senate before they can to stay alive in this session. So getting that all done in the next 2 weeks is going to be challenging. So we're going to have to prioritize those bills here in the next day or 2. And I'll just tell you about one of the committees I was on last week. Actually, 2 of them. The first one dealt with the issue of dense breast tissue. Now, as a man, this is a touchy subject, so I'll just tell you what the problem is when you get a mammogram. If you have this dense breast tissue, it can cause your mammogram to have false negatives because the x-ray actually shows more white on it than it should, so they can't actually see the cancer cells that might be in that mammogram. And this is not known to women in general. There's like 1 in 6 women in Iowa that have this condition, and the bill that we have would just make it more educational to the doctors and to clinics, and they are required by this bill to at least notify you that you have this condition and that you probably should get a different type of mammogram to get a real good idea of whether you're vulnerable to breast cancer. So that one was an easy one. It was only about 10 people that visited. We did it in the lounge. Took about 10 minutes to listen to. Everybody's in favor of doing this, of course, because it's an issue that's very important to women's health, and so it passed unanimously. The second issue I was on was a bigger committee. We had it in a bigger room, dealt with fetal body parts, and the bill would say that you cannot sell or buy fetal body parts in Iowa, is the gist of it. Then in walks the University of Iowa, who's been doing research on a line of cells that go way back to 1974 from an aborted fetus in the Netherlands. And colleges and universities have been doing studies on this same line for the last, do the math, 74 to 2004, 40 years plus. And they wanted to be exempted from the bill, so they offered an amendment to allow them for this research to continue. So at that point, it passed out of the subcommittee. It's still alive, but we're working on the amendment to correct this problem, because after 40 years of research and millions of dollars, it's not only the University of Iowa, it's also Iowa State is involved in this as well. So that's what you get into in a subcommittee, but we just don't have enough room in the Capitol. And I'm not asking you to build an annex on the Capitol, don't get me wrong. I just wish at this time, because when I met with the groups in this, I said there's a reason our forefathers didn't build more rooms. It's a limiter on how big and how fast government can really grow. So those are my opening comments, and I'll turn it over to Brian.
Good morning, everybody. Brian Best. This is my hometown, Glidden, so I got you on my home turf today. So I'm excited about that, having it here in Glidden. A couple things. I'll try to keep my comments short, because I know there's a lot of things we need to talk about today. So I'll just open up by saying, talk a little bit about how Iowa compares with surrounding states as far as the budget shortfall we had, the deappropriation we had to do. Iowa had to deappropriate about $114 million because of our fiscal situation. We didn't come out as well as we thought we would. Revenue Estimating Conference does the best job they can to tell us what the money we'll have to work with. We were $114 million short this year. But we were other than South Dakota, we were of all the states in this area, we did pretty well. Nebraska had to deappropriate $276 million. Missouri, $146 million. Kansas, $346 million. That would be a huge heavy lift, and it'd be a tough job to do. So the 114 wasn't as severe as what some states had to go through. My chairs are the Economic Development Budget Committee, and I'm the chairman of that one, and that is the purview of we have the purview of Iowa Workforce Development and the IEDA, which is the Iowa Economic Development Authority. So those are the two major things that money goes to. It's about a $45 million budget. I'm also on Commerce, Human Resources Policy, and Transportation. And a couple of important bills that I'm chairing, or I'll be the manager of. One that's very important, I believe, is the autism bill that we're doing. And what that does is it requires insurance companies to begin to have benefits for autism. And autism hasn't been paid for in the past, except for just a little bit of money that came from the state through our Medicaid system. So what this does is the reason why it was never covered from insurances before was there was never really a clear way of knowing how it was being treated and if it was effective. they're coming out with a lot of things now, with behavior analysis and things like that, are being proven to help the kids with autism. So that's one of the primary bills that I'm working on right now. And I'll just go to the next question if you like.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. The committee has put together, if you have a program, you can see the three different questions. And the first one that we have is, in your mind, what is the most critical issue in the budget?
Okay.
And then what can the public do to advocate to resolve the issue?
I believe going forward for the next fiscal year, moving forward, there's three things that I think are very important. Getting Iowa community colleges funded. One statistic that I heard from a person in western Iowa was that we're 35% higher in tuition to students because of Nebraska. Nebraska's on the other side, so if you're on the western side of the state, it's tough for our area community colleges to compete with that. A lot of those students go into Nebraska. So I think we need to really look at community colleges and how we can help them so that they don't have that competition problem with the neighbors on the other side. Another thing is public safety. Highway patrol has been taking a beating for a long time. I think it's time that we get a few more highway patrolmen out there. I've been told that sometimes if there's an accident, it can take another backup highway patrolman 2 to 4 hours to get there. And that's really unacceptable. I think we need to do more for public safety and corrections. The original budget by the governor, the corrections was going to take a $15 million deappropriation. And I think we need to get corrections back on track too. I can't imagine any tougher job in the world than being a prison guard. And when you get to the point where you don't have enough, I think it's a public safety and it's a danger to those prison guards. So those are three very important issues that I think we need to work on this upcoming year.
Thanks, Brian. The question again was critical issues in the budget and your most critical. And I got a letter from David Roeder, who's the director of the Department of Management and Budget, on the 2nd of February, just last week. And the report is how we were doing for the previous month, the month of January. And the point I would like to bring out here is that the Revenue Estimating Conference, which meets in December and tries to figure out what our economy is doing, and give us an idea of what the growth will be. And that's what we set any new money in the budget is about, predicting, I think, another 3.6%. But this report that was sent out for this fiscal year we're currently in, it goes from July through January. And it has a graph here that speaks louder than words, and I know you can't see it, but there's a straight line across it at 3.6%, and then it has another line below it with the months. Well, for the month of January, we were growing at the rate of 1.6%. Now remember, 3.6% is the estimated growth, and we're at 1.6. So do the math. That's 2% less than what we set the budget at. So that kind of explains why we had to do the deappropriation, because we're way below what the estimating conference thought it was going to be. And if you look, if you can basically see that little graph, you can see it drops way down and starts out at 0 there in the first month, and it kind of goes up sharply. So it looked like until September that we were on a path to go right over 3.6, but since then it's dropped down. And it's been 1.6 and about 1.4 for the months from October now through January. So the policy has been that we spend 99% of the projected revenues for the next year. Except for, you see, where last year at 99%, we were still budgeting too high because we're more than likely going to stay 2% under the way this graph shows for this current year. So we've got to do a better job of budgeting. So that's the crisis. The budget We can't even do it at 99%. I would say we'd be better off if we budgeted at 90% of their prediction and put the rest in the bank. And the question asked, what can you do? It's in my mind. The next question asked, in my mind, what do I think the crisis is? And in the budgeting crisis, that's what creates all our woes here in the first place, is not being able to really predict what state revenues are going to be, and then missing it by 2% under what you thought it would be is really a troublesome issue. So, thank you.
Okay. Have you got any suggestions as to what the public can do to help you out on that?
Well, you can email or write your senator and tell him that 99% is probably still too high. A little tighter budgeting would improve on that, but there's a price to pay for doing that. Of course, it becomes, everybody suffers a little bit that way, but it's better to suffer a little bit and not blow the budget, so to speak, and have some more to grow on next year than it is to miss it and have to cut like we just did with that 114 million. So your help is always, you have a lot of influence out here, way more than you know. Don't ask me why, but I know it. So
You got any comments to that, Brian? What can the public do to advocate to resolve your concerns?
Well, I'll just take that a step further. I think what's really important to me as a legislator, and what happens a lot of times is we hear from the public whenever, especially when there's a polarizing issue, and there's a community of people who are not in favor of that issue. A lot of times we hear from them, and sometimes we really don't know where our constituency actually stands on certain items, because we only hear from the side that's being affected. And so sometimes I think it's a really good idea to let your representatives know if there's something that we're doing that you are in favor of, as opposed to a lot of times we just hear about the things that that people are really upset about.
Okay, the next question is, how do we go about resolving the water quality issue?
Just to give you a little history, the Iowa Water Quality Initiative was established in 2013, and what that's doing is it's trying to help implement nutrient reduction strategy. So we're trying to take some of those nutrients out of the water, which affects people downstream. And so one really interesting statistic that I didn't realize, and I found out just this morning because I called one of our representatives who's on the Ag Committee, and he said that we talk about the money that needs to go into it. I didn't realize this, but $300 million at the minimum is what's going into nutrient reduction strategy. That's not, most of that's not coming from the state. Some of it's coming from the federal government. Some of it's coming from private entities. So I think, even myself, I didn't realize just how much we are addressing it. A lot of times everybody thinks we keep talking about nutrient reduction strategy and we're not doing anything, but there are things being done. And Iowa State is really a big player in that, and they've got a lot of really smart people who are trying to find ways to really know when we're making progress and when we're not, because a lot of times it's really hard to quantify how much is being done, because weather patterns and all these different things change it from day to day, literally. So they're working on ways for us to try new technologies, do different things, and get on the right track to find out what's working and what's not. So I think that there is a lot of movement in that area, a lot more than what people probably realize.
I had the pleasure, as I told you I was on the Ag Committee. Last week we had a meeting with Bill Northey from the Iowa Department of Land Stewardship, along with Chuck Gibb, who's the director of the DNR, and a member of the Iowa State University who's been the dean of the college, has been working on water quality, and I can't remember his name, and I apologize for that. But they gave us a report on what they have seen in the last year in the program that's out there, the nutrient reduction strategy, which It relies on farmers to volunteer on their own land practices that will improve water quality. And and Bill Northey relayed the fact that all the money that was put out there last year to help supplement farmers on water quality projects was entirely used. And so there's been a lot of volunteerism by the farming community to get involved in these practices that keep the soil in place and the nitrates from moving down the river. Now, you know, nitrates are very water soluble. So the heavier the rain we have, the more likely that nitrate will get picked up by the water flow and end up in our streams. At the end of the discussion, I got to ask one question, and it was, are we doing testing at the border? When the water leaves Iowa in the Mississippi River, we're talking here mostly, can we tell whether we're making any ground? Well, at this point, they said you really can't tell. It's too early yet. I said, well, does the Corps of Engineers test the water leaving every state between us and the hypoxia zone in Louisiana? Well, they didn't know, but I suggested that would be a good idea, because how do you really know where it's coming from unless you test at every border? And it's not that difficult to test at every border, I wouldn't think. So I left that with them and went to a subcommittee meeting right after that. So I don't know what their answer was, but thank you, Hubert.
Okay. The next question is, what is on your agenda that you are having trouble with, and what can we do to help? You going to start?
Yeah, I'm trying to read my notes.
This is question 4.
Well, the big bills on my agenda are, again, repeating about the autism bill. It's very important to me. And one thing you can do to help is just email the representatives besides myself, if that's important to you also. It's good to have support from everybody down at the State House. Another bill that I think is very important that's going to come to the forefront this year, I hope, and I believe it will, is texting while driving, or hands-free, whatever you want to call it. Actually, texting while driving is becoming a hands-free bill. At one time, you know, we were trying to figure out the last couple of years about texting while driving. Okay, you can't text, but you can have the phone up to your ear and you can talk. Or and it was a secondary offense too, so you really couldn't be picked up for anything. Now to make it a primary offense, which means you could be picked up for not being hands-free or texting. So if a patrolman or a sheriff saw you and he believed you were texting, the way it was written before is he could pick you. Now there's a primary, he'd be able to pick you up. But the problem with that has become, well, what if you are trying to get on the internet on your phone? You know, there's a million different things you can do with that phone that wouldn't be texting, so it needs to be better defined. One statistic that came out, and I put this in my last newsletter, is that a person who is not paying attention because he's got his phone in his hand, if he's texting or whatever, is 6 times more likely to get into an accident than somebody who's drunk. And so if you're driving down the road drunk, you got a 6 times better chance of not getting in an accident than if you're texting. That's pretty amazing. And I know there's been people in this area, and everybody has heard, people are dying because of texting. So, so what the bill's going to do is it's going to say you have to be hands-free. So even if you're picking up your phone to talk to somebody, you're either going to have to pull over, or else you're going to have a device in your car that allows you to talk without holding the phone. I'm in favor of it, and I think most people are. I think there are some civil liberties issues, and I've always been a little bit of a libertarian, but sometimes you just got to decide what's right and what's wrong, and I think this is right. You know, you talk about what you can do to help. Is tell me what you think when I bring these things up, and you know, everybody in here, most of you probably know how to get a hold of us by email, but everybody in the State House has the same email. And if you're a senator or if you're a legislator, it's always your first name dot last name at legis.iowa.gov. If anybody wants to come up to me afterward and ask me for my email, I'd be glad to give it to you. That pretty much just talks about that issue from where I'm coming from, and I'll let Mark talk about it.
Thanks, Brian. The issue that's troubling me the most right now is how we're going to fund our regional mental health system. Mental health is the issue of if you have a family member that suffers from depression or suicidal tendencies and you want them committed to get an evaluation, to get help for them, you usually go to your local sheriff's office and then they have to find a place to go with them and to get help for them. That's always been funded through property tax at the county level. And a few years ago, the state says, we're going to jump in and help. And when they did that, it ballooned the budget immensely. And so a new plan was drafted in 1994 that would set up a different funding mechanism for regional and put the counties, instead of having 99 different systems, we'd have consistency across the state with just 14 regions. And for Carroll, you've joined up with Crawford and Sac and Buena Vista and Cherokee and Ida. That's your region now. And it set a funding mechanism in place that turns out to be very unequal between counties. Because the state, when it started to get so expensive, it was up to $214 million in 1994. So they said, well, we're going to stop, we're not going to fund this anymore, but we're going to cap you at whatever level you're at in 1994 and 5, or 5 and 6 it was, I believe. So some counties had a high cap and some had a low. And that means that now when they come to the table as a region, your supervisors are members of the regional board. They decide where they're going to set your tax for mental health. And since the ones that were capped low cannot move up, it means the ones that had the high caps are taxing their residents more than the ones that had the low caps. And so it's very unequal, and it's starting to tear the thing apart. And I've been trying to come up with a bill that will correct that problem, and I think maybe I have a solution. One we tried last year will just allow the low counties to come up, except for that one didn't get passed. It was rejected by the House, and we just extended what we did the year before for one more year because it's supposed to sunset this year. So this year, most of my committee members think like I do, that it's probably time for the state to get back involved in this thing and kind of merge the two ideas back together. And I'm trying to make that work. And so whatever help you would have, if you have mental health problems in your county, I need help convincing the House that this is a good idea. So you need to look up the members of the Human Resources Committee in the House and in the Senate both, and also the leadership, which would be Linda Upmeyer in the House and Bill Dix in the Senate, and tell them that you think this is a good idea, because the supervisors that I've talked to are universally happy with what they've been able to do since this regional system was started up, and their biggest problem is getting equity between the funding system. And I think the state originally was going to help to the tune of $30 million, and that's probably what we need to do again to really solve this problem in a straightforward way. So, thank you. That's
Okay. Just for a point of clarification, Brian mentioned that you could email your legislators your first name, last name, legislative.iowa.gov. That is for the House. For the Senate, and if you'll look on your legislative form that was passed out down here for the Senate, it's mark.sigabart at legis.state.is.us. I think that should probably be IA instead of
It's
IS.
probably IA, and that will work too now. They changed,
Oh, IS will work?
either one will work. I
Oh,
think
okay.
If you use Brian's, everything after the at, that's the safest one to use, right?
Okay, just for a point of clarification. Okay, with that, we'll open up questions from the floor. Again, I would ask that you give your name, and if you're with some organization, you can state that. If you're on for yourself, fine. But anyway, with that, Kenny?
Yeah, Kenny Snyder. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming to Glidden. And a little background, so 32 years of volunteering with Pheasants Forever and conservation efforts. And ironically, I didn't put Bob alongside of me today, but obviously most of you guys know Bob Van Horn. 25 years ago, I'm gonna guess, he did not know I was gonna do this, by the way. 25 years ago, I remember standing on Bob's farm, and he wanted to bring up a county main tile, which is unheard of, and surface it on his farm so it could filter water. And he was ahead of his time because no one knew that that was really part of the answer to the equation. Slowing down the water, filtering it naturally, putting it back under the surface. So at the end of Bob's farm, that county tile drops back under the ground and his neighbor farms right over it, just like they were before. So anyway, at the time, there was a grant available to build 7 wetlands was their goal, and I think Iowa State, IDOLS, they were all involved and said, can you find other people that would be willing to do that? And we did. We found 7 local landowners that were willing to surface water and then put it back either into the stream behind their wetland or back into the tile, either way. And all 7 of those, I think we built 9 of them for $20,000. They're all working yet today. And the landowner was allowed to go in the CRP in that area if it was a row crop area, if they had been row cropping that area. The cool part was, there are plenty of landowners that are willing to do some of these practices, and the problem is the dollars, and that's where, you're waiting for the punchline, and it's gonna be, I do support, I will. I'm a conservative, don't like inflicting taxes on myself any more than anybody else, but once in a while you need to do it, like Rob's Stadium. I mean, that was a great deal this week that got passed. Well, but he'll look good out there in the football uniform.
That's not the official name of the stadium. That's not gonna be the name of the stadium.
Well, depends on if he donates. But I guess my point is, there is so much talk. In 32 years, I have heard government talk till the farmers are sick of hearing them talk. Seeing more things on the ground and working with landowners, and I'm all about volunteer effort, that works, but there does need to be some money driven towards it, because you can't expect everybody to be as generous as Bob was. His wetland will filter water for the next 1,000 years, and it's doing it every day. And so our part of that game was, as volunteers, we would go on Sundays, take a sample of the inlet water out of the county main and the outlet when it dropped back into the tile, and there was never less than a 50% reduction in nitrates. And that was us, crazy as it sounds. We sent those samples to Des Moines Waterworks. And that was long before they thought about, a glorious lawsuit. So my point is, people are willing to do it. I think the state needs to get a little involved. If it's as big a move as I will, I don't know if that's the right thing, but there are people out there, and there are mechanisms out there. There's people in the NRCS offices now that are knowledgeable and willing to work with landowners to show them how they can get there from here. But it just, CREP Wetlands is really the program, and it was designed off of Bob's and the other 7 that were built in Carroll County. They work, and there are a lot of guys, there's guys in this room.
Kenny, we need to move on. Could you cut it short?
All right, I guess. All right. Anyway, so that's the game, and I guess
Sorry.
guys like Bob do need a round of applause just for doing what they do.
John.
Okay, John Van Horn, quick question, probably a long answer, 2 words, collective bargaining, where we at?
Well, as I started out about the subcommittee process, collective bargaining started out last week in the Labor Committee. It had its sub, and then it had its meeting with the full committee last Wednesday night. So that makes it eligible for debate on the floor, and I believe it's scheduled for Monday night at 6 o'clock in the Senate chamber. So the House and the Senate have worked together on the bill that's being proposed, and I don't think it's moving. I don't know if it's been in subcommittees in the House. I'll leave that for Brian. But there's right now the weekend has been overwhelmingly tons of emails and phone calls to put every state senator and representative probably on this issue, and the committee is still taking recommendations, and I see a lot of amendments coming on Monday night, and there'll be a lot of changes, I think, before it's all said and done, because the committee's got an open mind, even though you don't maybe believe that, they do try to do the things that would make sense, so.
It passed committee in the House also. It will be debated this week, I'm sure, but I don't know which day it'll be. And just something I want to add, we were in Audubon earlier, and that's why we're a couple minutes late. I apologize for that, but collective bargaining became a very important issue down there, and we tried to spend as much time talking to them as we could. One thing I'll say is we don't, our forums get kind of cut short sometimes, and so there'll be a lot of different questions, I'm sure, and a lot of it will be about collective bargaining. I'm more than happy to stick around as long as it takes after the forum is over for anybody who wants to speak personally about that. You have this forum too, but I want to make sure there's time for everybody to say what they have to say.
I just would add that I'd like to hear what you have to say, and if there's a particular point you'd want me to take back to that committee. Now, I'm not on the committee, but I'll certainly, I sit next to Jason Schultz. I live next to him too, so I get to see him quite often. And he told me the other day that there'll probably be some changes made. So whatever points you would like to make that I can deliver, please do so.
Okay, back there.
My name is Dick Carroll, and I represent me. I was around as a state employee before collective bargaining came in. And I can tell you the primary reason collective bargaining exists today is because of the abuses by management in the state house and the state government. That's the reason collective bargaining was passed to begin with, was to correct those problems of mismanagement. One of the big things you're doing with collective bargaining is you're wanting to take health insurance out of it completely. That's one of the biggest benefits that comes to any state employee, is having good health insurance. And I'm not sure the legislature is the place to even be talking about it, because the legislature has obviously abused their right to have state health insurance to the point where it ought to be taken away from them completely, or else you should be required to pay however much you got in benefits that were collected illegally over the last few years before you can stay in the program at all. If it was any other state employee, you would be harping at them to pay back what they got wrongfully.
Okay.
I'm proud to say that 4 years ago, I co-sponsored a bill that would require state legislators to pay part of their health insurance costs, 20%. It didn't get brought up by the, it went through the subcommittee back then, but when it made it to the floor, it stopped in the Senate and didn't go any farther. So the same bill has been introduced this year, and it's through the subcommittee process, and it will be acted on as soon as possible to start with the next fiscal year or so.
Will they pay back however much they got wrongfully?
I don't know the answer to that question because I'm not on the committee. They probably should. I don't know how far you want to go back. We'd have to probably resurrect some people to get it paid back.
Well, as far back because they've got records.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, the next question. Kurt?
Kurt Swears, I'm with the County, State, and National Corn Growers Association. Can you give me a little insight where the tax coupling bill 179 is at? Is it alive, dead? And I'd like to ask one more question after you answer.
Okay, the question really came up when the de-appropriation part of this session, which was one of the first things we did on the floor. While we'd love to have put it in permanently, our plan is to hopefully do that next year, and it wasn't allowed this year. So it's about $100 million more in the state coffers than if we would have allowed it, and with $114 million in cuts that needed to be done, it looks to me like the farmers are going to carry the brunt of that this year, and that's my comment. So.
Yeah, I think moving forward, there's definitely interest in making it permanent. I wouldn't want to make any guesses on what's going to happen for this next fiscal year, because again, I think we're expecting the state to be running on a really tight budget again. So I'd say your guess is as good as mine looking forward. I would say one thing I think we do need to do is put clarity in it, so you're not sitting there at the end of the year wondering if you're going to be able to deduct or not. And I think that's kind of a tough one. And generally, you know, we've always coupled, and then this past year we couldn't. So I know I was talking to my accountant just the other day, and he said that I think he had to refile for about 20 different farmers who had, and maybe not just farmers, but businessmen. So I think it does need clarity, but I can't promise you that it will or will not happen this year. I think it really depends on what the budget looks like when we get closer.
Do you think that your colleagues, long question, short answer, I hope, when I look at it, and I appreciate you saying business, because business is just involved as this, as what agriculture is, although agriculture probably gets a bigger piece of it. Do you feel like your colleagues understand the fact that if this tax provision is in effect, whether it be a salesman who gets a little extra commission, whether it be a factory worker who has to help build an extra tractor, all the above have extra money at the end of the year to, whether it be home improvements, things that pay sales tax, things that increase property taxes, where the property taxes are to the benefit of our schools, our state, local, you know, wherever. Do you think they're giving enough emphasis to that side of it as well?
I'm sorry,
Well, I know I understand the effect as being a business person. You know, it affected me this year too, and so I think a lot of them do, and I think most of them are trying to do the right thing. But in some cases, you know, it's just it's kind of a conundrum, and I really believe that most of them do, though. I mean, and I think that they, in general, support it, but realize that sometimes the budget just can't handle it.
I just don't think anybody was expecting that we would be as short as we were going into this year. Otherwise, it probably would have happened this year. But again, it goes back to that 99% of spending when you do the budget in the first place, and hitting that number a little bit better than what we have in this past year. Otherwise, it seems to have worked most years that you take the 99% of whatever the REC recommends and get along fine. But you know what happened to the price of corn. You're a corn grower, and it's halfway back to $7 right now, which is an enticing thought. That'll bring us out of this quicker than anything. And
Okay, back there.
Greg Geller, I'm the union president at Arweva, and Mark's neighbor, and I'd just like your own personal opinions on that collective bargaining law as it stands now. Don't tell me about it's in committee. You know what it says. I want your personal opinion, and I want to follow up if I can get one.
Well, I believe it brings, the object of the thing is to bring more local control back to the school boards and the supervisors and the hospital boards, and allowing them to do what's right for their community and for their own situations. And I think it's something that should have been picked away at a little bit, rather than the big bill that it is now is kind of overwhelming, because it's making so many changes that you're really not sure where you stand, and that's why I'm asking for comments on particular pieces of it, if you've had the opportunity to look at it. But I think it could change fundamentally where Iowa's headed in the future, so. And it could actually improve the wage structure of teachers and other employees. You can actually do merit pay if this gets passed, and it wouldn't necessarily be the first one in, first one hired, first one fired kind of situation that I think currently happens. So.
I think the teachers know, they understand the situation a lot better than a lot of us, because you guys are living it. But I guess my question, and I've been, we talked about this in Audubon, is if under collective bargaining you lose some of the rights that you have, and then it goes to the school and speaking with your school boards and your administration, trying to reach out, hammer out an agreement. The big one that they talked about was healthcare. And I guess my question would be, and you can answer this for me, is wouldn't the teachers, if they're not able to bargain on healthcare, wouldn't the administration have that much more to work with on the wages? Because they can't bargain the healthcare, but there's a certain amount of money there, and so the administration has that to work with. And the conversations we've had, I think, is that school boards and administrations are not going to work in good faith. And so, I mean, I'm assuming they are, but I guess I'm willing to listen.
The bill limits how much money they can give on wages.
I don't believe it limits how much they can give on wages, only if it goes to arbitration.
3% is what it says in the paper.
If it goes to arbitration.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't go to arbitration, then they have free right to give whatever wage they
The
want.
school board is gonna give more money than they have to?
Well, that's the question I'm asking. You're assuming the school board isn't gonna support the teachers, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because they're not getting the money from the state. You guys have not given the schools enough money to pay for the teachers they need. You're on the economic committees, it seems like, several of them. Has there been any discussion of eliminating some of the tax breaks and the corporate giveaway money going to big corporations? You know, the paper said there was, what, $12 billion in tax giveaways, forgiveness, what have you, mainly to corporations, on a $7 billion budget. Now, if I came home and said, honey, we can't buy groceries this week because I gave away 65% of my paycheck to somebody else, there'd be hell to pay. Well, you guys are giving money back to corporations that don't need it, and then say, well, we haven't got enough money to take care of our own kids.
I'll certainly be looking into that, but one thing to keep in mind is a tax credit isn't money that you're giving them. It's money that they're not paying you, which there is a difference, because if you have a business that comes in from out of state and you had nothing, having part of something is better than all of nothing. States have to be competitive, and I'm not totally saying that we don't need to look at tax credits, but I think that there is. I think it's a conversation that needs to be talked about. But I'd say tax credits in itself is not necessarily an evil thing.
Giving $65 million to an Egyptian corporation to build a fertilizer plant that has not yet produced a thing, their $65 million could have gone a long way to helping out the schools this year.
They didn't receive $65 million yet.
It's money that we are not gonna get in taxes.
Your point's well taken, but I'm just saying, we did not give them $65 million.
The trickle down is not working. it's trickle up. The big boys are getting richer by the day, and the people at the bottom of the economic spectrum are getting poorer and poorer. You're neglecting the kids that are our future in this state. You're giving them a substandard education because you aren't willing to pay for it. Every year for the last several years, you have underfunded education and said, well, there's just not money there. Well, there is money there if you stop giving it away.
Well, I'm willing to look at what you're saying. I'm willing to look at it. But again, you know, I think it's a little bit of a false statement to say that we've given $65 million away. We did not give $65 million away. And I'm not trying to just stick up for my committee. I think there has to be something that comes back out of it. I think there has to be jobs created, and I think there has to be an advantage that the state would get that they wouldn't have otherwise in taxpayers and other issues. And so if they don't employ anybody, no, it's not a good trade-off. But
We see no statistics on how much return we get for that investment in economic development. Other than to show that there are so many of them out there that aren't paying back loans that were given to them for no interest.
well, I'm new on the committee, but I will check in on that. And I think there needs to be fairness and transparency in that, but I think we have to quantify it. I think we need to know, what are we getting back? And if we can't quantify it, it's tougher to sell, no doubt about it.
I just wanted to follow up on that, since you asked me the question about how negotiations work. I've been on negotiations for 20 years. And the school district that I'm at, when we sit down and with our board and representatives, is here's the pot of new money, and 60-some% of it's salary, so we say, okay, here's your part. Whether you want to go to salaries or insurance, you decide. So, I mean, I don't say how you're gonna say that salaries will go up. It's just that pot of money's getting shifted. It's to all the salaries. Okay, because our health insurance, and I don't have great health insurance over there. I know what your guys' is. I looked it up this morning. You guys ought to be ashamed.
It's the same plan that every other state worker out there gets as well.
No, Mark. Did you read the Des Moines Register and look at it in the database? It's on there. The union pays let me get my figures. A union member would pay $330.80 according to the register. You and all two of you and Jason Schultz. You guys' premium was $1,669. I did my research. You pay $20 a month.
It's 20 per paycheck.
Huh?
It comes off my paycheck every time, it's $20.
$20 a month.
$20 a month,
Part-time job.
$240 a year. I checked mine, I'm sure it's
Well, then
20.
you better go and straighten up the Des Moines Register. That's what's on the website.
Great, I
I
will.
But I mean, and I'm sure your deductible is a lot different than mine. But anyway, you guys can check that out. If it's not right, it's out there.
Well, as I said before, we've got a bill to correct the problem, and if we owe it back, we will correct it.
Well, Mark, it was on your radar about health insurance, 4 years ago when you got in there. It should have still been on your radar.
It still is, but this is the first opportunity we had to do, in the majority, to do anything about it. So we're working on it, Greg. So.
Well, at any time, a legislator could have stood up and said, wait a minute, we're not paying our fair share. And nobody stood up in the legislature until the Des Moines Register caught them with their hand in the cookie jar. Then they said, oh yeah, there is a problem there.
I'll let that go.
I think it's noted. We do have a question here in the front too that we'd like to get to.
Matt Razab, Carroll Daily Times Herald. Kind of a couple kind of related questions. But first I need to ask you where you stand on the minimum wage bill that's going through to restrict counties from making that decision.
I would make it universal across the state. One level wherever you're at, and it's not a local decision, I do not believe.
Yeah, it's causing havoc between counties in urban areas especially. I wouldn't be against doing something to increase it a little bit, but at the same time, what we've got right now is, I think we have counties as high as $15 an hour. And then, am I wrong?
I don't think it's that high anywhere.
I thought it got that in Iowa City. I might be
I
wrong.
think it's maybe, over like the next 3 years, it gets up to 12 something, I think, if I remember.
Okay. Well, if I'm wrong, I apologize for that, but that's what I thought. But let's just say you've got a county at 735 and you've got a county at 1050. It creates havoc. And so I would rather see slight increases over time so everybody's the same.
So my follow-up to that is, take your words right out of your mouth. The reason this collective bargaining thing is great is because it gives locals control over, you know, what they want to do and what's best for their communities, were your exact words. So why, on this issue, is it great for the local communities to be able to make their own decisions, but on minimum wage it's not? Seems to me it would still create the same amount of havoc with collective bargaining. If this community is gonna give a teacher 50 grand, and this one's gonna give 35, this district's gonna suffer.
That's a tough one. I'll try to think of something, okay? I'll be honest with you. You got me on that one.
I just don't think you can have different levels all over the state and have a system that can work.
My final question is, if this is such a great deal for the taxpayers, the collective bargaining thing, why exempt cops and firefighters?
Because they're risking their lives on a daily basis.
So that gives them the right to have an unfair, since that's the problem, is it's not fair right now. So cops get to have an unfair bargaining agreement because they do a dangerous job.
I will tell you that a new deputy down at Audubon just said it treat us all the same. So I wrote that down and I'll take that back when I go back.
One last question.
School vouchers. Why has that come back up again? And why should taxpayers, I am all for a parent being able to send their child to a private school. I am against taxpayers supplementing that. Why has that come back again, school vouchers?
Well, it's been an issue that's been out there. It may seem like it just came back up again, but it was a position of the Republican Party for a long time, and it failed to ever get even a debate in the Senate, and it's time, I think.
I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself.
Okay,
Judy Stockbridge.
And you have to realize that the taxpayer that, I'm thinking more along the homeschool lines, they're all taxpayers as well, and they get no benefit if they don't send them to school, so.
Okay, but most of the public school, the private schools are also religious schools. So why doesn't that violate church and state? Separation of church and state.
I guess because they're still taxpayers. If there was an exemption to pay taxes on a religious level, it'd probably be true.
I think there has to be a balance. I mean, I think there's a fairness there that we have to reach. I think that if you send your son or daughter to a private school of any kind, and they can do the things that they need to do as far as the testing to make sure that they're getting quality education, I think that there should be some leniency that way. I think as far as what they call the ESAs, I think it's going to be a real heavy lift because, for one thing, I understand that I like Kemper, and I like Carroll, and I like Glidden Ralston, and I don't want to see other schools hurt because of this bill, but I do also want to see some help for the private schools also. So it's a tightrope, and it's hard to know just how to run that, and but your point's well taken. I understand what you're saying.
In the end, the answer to me is growing the economy in the state and When we all do better, everybody will do better, so that's my goal.
Okay, let's give Mark and Brian a round of applause for thanking them for being here, taking their time to answer our questions. I would like for the legislative committee to stand and be recognized. And then we have Megan and Shannon from the chamber here also. And so, again, thanks to the American Legion for the use of the facilities and for the Carroll County Corn Growers for the rolls and orange juice. And then the next forum will be February 25th, that's in 2 weeks, at Swanley Conservation Education Center. March 11th, a month from now, Manning Regional Health Care Center. The 25th of March, DMAC. 8th of April, the Carroll Dental Association, and April 22nd, Carroll High School. So with that, I would encourage you to contact your legislators on what you think and go from there.